support can go hand in hand with its climate obligations. The Chancellor's used a speech in Oxfordshire to promise to create the right conditions to boost the UK economy. Rachel Reeves has told Andrew Marr on LBC that new infrastructure is needed for growth.
We've said to Heathrow that we want the plans that they bring forward by the summer to meet rules around carbon emissions, noise pollution and air quality. We'll work with Heathrow to make sure that those plans come forward. But look, the answer to new infrastructure can't always be no.
The Conservatives have accused the government of adopting their policies. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has denied being an anti-vaxxer as the Senate decides whether or not to allow him to be the new US Health Secretary. He's been a vocal sceptic, previously suggesting there's a link between jabs and autism. Captain Sir Tom Moore's name has been dropped from the foundation set up in his honour. The charity's watchdog found there had been repeated misconduct and mismanagement by the fundraiser's daughter and her husband. And Tesco's cutting 400 jobs from its head office, mobile shops and in-store bakeries. The supermarket says it will try to find alternative jobs for anyone affected. In the city, the FTSE 100's closed up 23 points at 85.57. The pound buys $1.24 and €1.19. LBC weather, cloud and rain gradually clearing tonight. Isolated showers expected in Northern Ireland and Northern Scotland and a low of -2. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening and welcome to, is it Tuesday or Wednesday? It's Tuesdays. It's Wednesday. Honestly, what a great start. What a great start to the hour. Welcome to Wednesday's Cross Question. On our panel tonight, sitting next to me, Sarah Olney, the Liberal Democrat Cabinet Office spokesperson and MP for Richmond Park. Next to her, Mark Harper, the former Conservative Transport Secretary and Chief Whip. To my right, Ella Whelan, columnist for the Daily Telegraph, and next to her, Paul Mason, the writer and broadcaster. We have a lot to get through tonight, so do dial in with your questions on 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp us on the same number, and you can text 84850 and watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Now, before we start, if anyone thinks it's a little odd that we haven't got a Labour representative on the panel tonight, we had the chair of the Transport Select Committee, Ruth Cadbury, but unfortunately she pulled out yesterday. So apologies for that. But we have Scott in West Hampstead. That's more important with our first question. Scott, fire away.
Hello, Iain. Good evening, panel. Has the Chancellor made the right choices for growing the British economy? Or could she have chosen some alternative strategies to encourage more business investment and more immediate growth?
Paul Mason.
Well, I don't mind being a stand-in for Labour. I am a Labour Party member.
You're the nearest we're going to get.
Okay. Scott, great question. Do you know what I think? Almost all these choices are right, but they're not going to bring growth anytime soon. I think we're seeing across the pond Donald Trump come in and throw his toys around, make sort of some quite crazy decisions from my point of view. But Trump is showing what you can do if you just go in with an element of positivity and rip up the rules from day one. And I now regret that Labour haven't done that. If we want some immediate growth, I bang on every media appearance I appear on, we could be scrapping diesel cars. My mates with their old Jags that you can buy for single-figure sums, we should be offering them money to scrap them and buy EVs. That would give you some bottom-line growth. I'm not against any of the things she's done today. Some of them have been around for a while. Oxford, Cambridge, Golden Triangle, Heathrow. We might come to Heathrow, the specifics.
I think we probably will.
I live under both the Heathrow and the London City Airport flight path, but I've come to the conclusion that everything we do has got to enhance the security of this country. We're in a very different situation than last time when Heathrow was knocked back. I opposed it then. I'm reluctantly in favour of it now. But it's not going to deliver growth for 20 years. So what I want to see in the next quarter is Rachel Reeves coming forward with some immediate things, car scrappage, stuff to boost the housing market now, not in 6 months' time. it's because the world is not growing. Even China is in trouble in terms of growth. We need to grab as much growth as we can get.
What could she have done to generate growth in the short term? Because I agree with your main thrust there, that we live in a society where people want instant gratification. Labour made that the centrepiece of their manifesto and will be judged on it whenever the next election comes.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, she's got an institution, she's got an architecture, the same as Liz Truss had, that doesn't. I think the architecture of this country's monetary and fiscal policy, to get technical, is primed to basically it's primed to produce a doom loop of high interest rates, low investment, and long-term stagnation. And so one of the things she could have done is, she didn't have to change the remit of the Bank of England, but she could write them a letter saying, look, interest rates are pretty high. Interest rates are high given how low growth is. And you tolerated a very high inflation. I think that she could just be using what we used to call regulation by eyebrows. The eyebrows could be moving up and down a bit, saying, "Come on, guys, let's have a." She said, didn't she? Goldman Sachs have predicted 6 interest rate cuts. Well, the eyebrows could have gone up a little bit more and said, "Well, get on with it."
Well, let's go to someone who's raised the odd eyebrow in his time, I'm sure, in his meetings with regulators. Mark Harper, former Transport Secretary. Now, it's actually by chance we've got you on tonight, but of course this was a subject that the coalition government, followed by the Conservative government, were quite strong on. I mean, in terms of Heathrow, which we might talk about a little bit later in more detail. But when you look at the decisions that she's made today, she's taken quite a few long-term decisions, which some people would say your government shied away from.
Well, no, I'm afraid I took the trouble, to be fair to Rachel Reeves, of reading her speech today, and I'm afraid most of the significant things she announced were things that sounded awfully familiar to me, because, funnily enough, I announced them myself, and we were getting on with them. So the Transpennine route upgrade, £10 billion of investment in the north of England, well, that's well underway. That's not a new thing. We're halfway through doing that. The Oxford-Cambridge East-West Rail, I'm hugely supportive of that, and the development it will generate, but I announced that, and we've been getting on with building that. The first connection stage of that actually starts this year. So these aren't new things. These are things that have been in train and happening, and we announced them. And it's great that she's carrying them on, and they've got some ambition to speed them up. But the new things are not very significant. The big problem is what she did in the first 6 months of the government and what she did in the budget. She had a massive tax rise, which I don't think was necessary. The OBR did not stand up what they keep repeating about a black hole. The OBR did not stand that up at all in the documents or in their interviews. She put a massive tax increase on business. They're just about to put £5 billion worth of cost on business in their unemployment legislation, as we've christened it today, because that's what it is. It's going to kill jobs. On the news there was Tesco's cutting jobs, and Sainsbury's have been doing so. And the first 6 months was the opposite of positivity. It was talking the country down. So the OBR in the budget revised down their growth forecasts for the next 5 years, and she's having to recover from that. So I think actually a good start would be to stop loading costs on business, get on with some of the infrastructure. Most of it's very good and very sensible. The money that's spent on public services should come with reform. So all that money they've thrown at public sector workers, on train drivers, what they put into the NHS, you've got to buy something with it. You've got to get productivity improvements. You've got to drive reform. And what they've done is they've put the money in without getting any reform, which means the thing that public care about is what you get for the money. They're not going to get better outcomes. And she's then had to put the taxes up, which is going to drive down growth. So although the government says the number one priority is growth, if you look at what they do as opposed to what they say, it doesn't work. The things they're doing are actually going to damage growth rather than improve it.
Sarah Olney, let's repeat the question. Has the Chancellor made the right decisions for growth?
Well, I mean, she's overlooked I think the number one thing that the government could be doing. The single best lever that the government have for growth right now is to negotiate a better relationship with the EU. We've been calling, the Liberal Democrats have been calling for a UK-EU customs union, and that could bring down so many trade barriers. It could relieve so many of our small businesses of some of the paperwork that they're having to deal with, some of the red tape, and we know that could immediately unlock significant growth for the UK. So that's the number one thing. That's the single biggest thing that they could do to boost growth in the UK. But
you're calling for it in the full knowledge that they won't do it.
Why won't they do it? I mean, it's there. It's right there.
Because
it's
we've
on
left
the table.
The EU.
Well, we're talking about a customs union. We're not talking about going back into the European Union. I mean, Keir Starmer's going to Brussels on Monday. It's be the first time that British Prime Minister has met with many of the heads of state altogether since Brexit. So I'm encouraged to think that they are thinking seriously about the relationship. I think they're being sincere when they say they want to rebuild trust and so on. But I think the world has changed apart from anything else since the general election. We've had the re-election of Trump in the States, as Paul was saying, and I think that changes the game quite a bit. They need to get serious about how they're going to deliver growth. It's not going to be through making speeches. It's going to be about seriously thinking about where are those new markets going to come from, where are those growth opportunities, and it's absolutely. Well, but I mean, the opportunities...
Slowest growing parts of the world, big opportunities are in the other parts of the world where we now have trade deals, which we would all have to exit
We can have those as well. We can have those as well. But the point is,
if you're in a customs union...
We haven't got frictionless trade with our closest neighbours.
No, so if you're in a customs union, you cannot have a trade deal. You'd have to come out of the one with all the fast-growing Pacific countries. You can't be in the customs union and have trade deals with other people. The EU would be back in control of our trade policy again. You can't have both of them at the same time.
So the point is that's where there's far more opportunity because they're our closest trading neighbour. There are far more opportunities for us to trade with the EU than there are for us to continue as we are. That's the single biggest lever that Rachel Reeves could pull. Much better than I support some of the things she's announced today. Of course, we need investment in infrastructure, but the other big mistake I think she made in the first 6 months was the jobs tax, and I think reversing that would be the best thing she could do in the short term because that's having a serious,
But then she creates her own black hole. That's what she would say.
I think the problem she's going to have is that the amount that she's going to raise from the jobs tax is going to be very quickly frittered away by the amount of extra money that's going to be needed to give to the public sector to pay those additional employer costs. And then, of course, all of the other costs that are going to filter through into the public sector. We're not going to see the rise in employment that we need to see because companies are going to stop hiring because it's become expensive. There will be businesses going bust because they've become unviable because of these additional costs.
You're sounding so conservative.
I don't think what I just said about the customs union makes me sound like a conservative, but Mark contradicts me.
That is very true. Unless you're Michael Heseltine, but Ella Whelan.
I really think I'm not.
Well, a lot of what was announced was positive. I mean, it seems to me obvious that you should have an expansion at Heathrow, and it seems obvious that you should have more infrastructure projects, but as has already been said, it's not anything particularly new. And the important point that all of this is premised upon meeting targets in relation to emissions for Heathrow in relation to noise. And you just know it's not going to... You just know that it's not going to happen easily, at least. Michael O'Leary has been quoted all over the place saying that it's a dead cat because it's going to take 15, 20 or whatever years anyway. And in fact, it's a sort of small fry in terms of meeting the needs of people who are going to be wanting to be flying in the next 10, 20 years. That being said, I want to be positive about what this government's doing because I want some positive things to happen in the lives of people in this country. Don't want to constantly be moaning. But they have to deal with this issue of, their remaining commitment to net zero is Ed Miliband, who's sort of been throwing his weight around and whispers in Westminster of him saying behind the scenes, I will be the voice for the climate and I won't be moved out, and threatening to resign over Heathrow and all the rest of it. Is that side of the party's politics going to win out? In which case, none of this stuff is going to work. We don't currently have the electricity to power the data centres for this Silicon Valley in between Oxford and Cambridge.
It's very interesting, the shift in language here, isn't it? Where you've got Rachel Reeves saying, don't worry about bats and newts, they don't matter. Now, that's something that I would never have thought I would hear a senior Labour politician say.
I think there is a realisation, and I am on the green wing of Labour, but in the sense that I am very enthusiastic about net zero, and I think it is, as she says, a growth opportunity. But there's a realisation that there is a choice to be made, or trade-off, that there is an either-or, between rapidly rolling out renewable energy and sustainable, defending the natural environment. the people building, I see Hinkley Point and Sizewell, the two big nuclear stations, as essential for what we're going to have to do. But the people building them, it's not newts and bats, it's salmon in the Bristol Channel. Apparently 12 more salmon a year will die because of the nuclear power station. 12?
A whole 12?
Yes, and therefore hundreds of millions and hours of court time are being spent sorting this out.
I mean, it's madness.
It is, but worse madness, there's a high likelihood that a person dies maintaining the fish protector, because the Bristol Channel's an unstable waterway. So this stuff, I think Labour have got into power and they've realised, oh my God, this is, and you must have been power, you're dealing with these micro-managerial levels of environmental stuff, and then you're dealing with, I've forgotten what they call them. They're not quangos, but they're sort of bodies with responsibility, like Natural England, like the RSPB. None of them have got growth mandates, and none of them have got actual net zero mandates.
You could do what you mentioned that Trump is doing, which is come in and say, right, our priority is not the newts and bats or the salmon or even the birds or whatever. I'm in danger of, again, revealing myself as not an animal fan. Remember the cow incident the last time.
Oh, no, don't go there.
But at the moment we have large numbers of people who are, this winter, who will have died because they can't heat their homes. People who are mums unable to run hot baths for their kids, all the rest of it. We can't currently meet the energy needs of the people already in this country, and things are not adequate. And so what is your priority? Is your priority net zero and the sort of vagaries of Ed Miliband and Sadiq Khan and people who want to look like Mr. Green Hero, or is it what people actually want? And I'm really glad that Labour has changed its tack a little bit, because it reflects public pressure. Yeah. There has been, whether it's the farmer protests or all the rest of it, there is a sense in this country and throughout Europe that people are not happy with the net zero regime. And so, fair play to the Labour Party if they're starting to listen to it. I wish they'd tell them to shut up.
Did this £100 million bat tunnel on HS2 come across your desk?
It didn't come across my desk. It would have been done by HS2. And in fact, Mark
probably
Wilde...
tells us all we need to know, doesn't it?
Mark Wilde, who was the chief executive, though, said the reason why it was done was because that's what the law said. So, I mean, one of the problems here is...
But why do bats need a tunnel?
Well, one of the problems is we have to... Politicians are responsible for changing the law. So the interesting thing, you mentioned the regulator issue. So if you want regulators to behave differently, the government has to give them different instructions or change the law. So we do that with the CAA. So I did that when I was Transport Secretary. I made sure that they have a very important responsibility, the Civil Aviation Authority, for safety, and that's the number one priority. But they also have to balance economic growth, the prosperity of the country. And so when they're sitting down going, how are they going to regulate the industry, they've got to balance those things. And that's what all the regulators should have, is they should have...
And she does seem to be addressing...
They should have to balance. Well, yeah, but you have to have more than just a meeting with them. You've actually got to change the rules that they've got, either the letters...
Change the mindset.
And the government gives them, every year, the government writes to these people and gives them their instructions and says, this is what we want you to focus on. And basically, if you don't, and you appoint the people that do it, and if they don't do what you want them to, you can fire them and get new people, and you have to be a bit keener at doing that, and we did do some of that when we were in government.
To be fair to Rachel Reeves, she's fired the chief of the Competition and Markets Authority, and I think that was part of that. Although things are going to be different.
Arguably not necessarily the good one, because that's the one that's supposed to stop large monopolistic companies and stop them stopping innovative, smaller companies getting into the marketplace. So that's maybe not the best example, but shaking stuff up is a good thing.
Changing who's in charge of it.
But that's a good thing. That may be not the best one.
Let me bring you some breaking news. Donald Trump has just revealed that he's going to sign an executive order to tell the Pentagon and the US Department of Homeland Security to prepare a special facility at, wait for it, Guantanamo Bay, the place where the US has infamously detained terror suspects for long periods of time, which would be able to house 30,000 illegal migrants, or as he's just referred to them, the worst criminal illegal aliens threatening the American people. I wish I could do a Donald Trump impression. If you have a question on this latest move by Donald Trump, we'd love to hear from you. 0345 6060 973. More of your questions in just a moment. It's 8:20.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
22 minutes past 8. Mark Harper, former Conservative Transport Secretary, Sarah Olney, Liberal Democrat Cabinet Office spokesperson, Paul Mason, writer and broadcaster, and Ella Whelan, columnist for the Daily Telegraph, with us. Now, here's Archie in Inverness with a text question. Should the statement by Rachel Reeves today best be summed up by the words, drill, baby, drill? Meanwhile, Steve's text asks this. Are the Labour Party betraying future generations in terms of a livable planet in their obsession with immediate growth? Sarah.
There is no way they can expand Heathrow Airport and be consistent with the climate targets that the government have set itself. And
Rachel Reeves would disagree.
Well, I know, but that's because she's talking about things like sustainable aviation fuel, which is an entirely untried technology.
It's not. I went to America on a plane with 100% aviation fuel.
Yeah, but it's
with
not
Virgin Atlantic, and it was fine.
But how many times did Virgin Atlantic fly to the US with its sustainable aviation fuel?
Well, no, this was a test.
There you go. You see, that's what I mean. It's not currently being used.
Well, it is being used. That's the point. Virgin Atlantic are using it.
In with
Virgin Atlantic, honestly, according to a pilot that we spoke to in the last hour, said Virgin Atlantic are using it on all their flights.
Okay. My point is, it's not going to touch the sides as far as the carbon emissions that Heathrow, both currently and an expanded Heathrow, it's currently the largest source of carbon emissions in the UK. But, in terms of the additional carbon emissions that an expanded Heathrow are going to, there's no way they can meet their net zero plans. And that's not just about the extra runway. It'll be all the additional traffic needing to get to the airport. It'll be all the additional services. It will be the carbon emitted just to build
the Elizabeth line.
Well, I mean, but the point is that it's not sufficient capacity for what Heathrow has now, and there are no plans at the moment. I mean, the point is you can't get the economic growth that Rachel Reeves is looking for from Heathrow unless you can get all of those additional customers to the airport. Yes, some of them can travel on the Elizabeth line, but that just about creates extra capacity now, but that just about creates the capacity that's needed for the current airport. Where's the extra capacity going to come from to get all of those new passengers to the airport?
Quoting the pilot, who was probably better than, I shouldn't say this, but better than the guests we had here. He was saying that around 50% of Heathrow flights at the moment are held for sort of half an hour. And think about the fuel that costs. He said with an extra runway, they wouldn't have to do that. And also the fact that cargo, which one of our guests said, well, actually cargo through Heathrow has been fairly static for the last 20 years. And the pilot said, well, that's because they can't be confident that the planes are going to land in time. So the argument that there doesn't need to be any more capacity doesn't really stack up.
Well, I mean, at the moment, we've got plans to expand Gatwick and we've got plans to expand Luton. So it's not like there is no plans to expand airport capacity in the southeast. What I would say is that the idea that we are going to expand Heathrow has been on the table for about 50 years and it hasn't yet happened. And I think the main reason that it hasn't happened is not because of NIMBYism or legal challenges or anything like that, but operationally it's incredibly difficult to do. And economically, in terms of like actually funding it and the return that investors would look to get on it, it doesn't really stack up. And that actually is the principal problem. You would need to put the M4 and the M25 out of action for quite some considerable time.
According to our pilots, apparently not.
But there is currently not a plan. Right. There isn't currently a plan on the table, but the last plan to expand Heathrow was rediverting the M25, which would have been incredibly disruptive, and in itself that would have had a massive economic cost. So operationally, it's incredibly difficult to do, and it's very hard to fund.
Well, that all might be true, but it just kind of doesn't wash. There's always a sort of pessimism with this any kind of suggestion of whether it's HS2 or Heathrow or anything like that. The answer is always, we can't because of X, Y, Z. And I don't want to keep going back to Trump because he's mad on 99 out of 100 things, but at least, that sort of spirit of can-do attitude towards things we could do with a bit more of in this country. I mean, when I think about there's been long-standing opposition to expansion of air travel, international travel, on the grounds of the environment, and the follow-up question was from Steve asking about whether or not we're selling out the environment. There's always been this weird sort of contradiction in relation to people's attitudes, which is that those who are always really anti-Brexit and pro-European and think they're very lovely global, we should all be very cultured people, want us to be international beings and see be in touch with the rest of the world and all the rest of it. But they're also
as long as we don't fly there.
Exactly. They're really anti-air travel, and there's this sort of snobbishness around it, which is that it's fine for your average middle class kid to go and do wonderful things that everyone should do, like see art galleries in other parts of the world. But your family from Luton who wants to go to Alicante for a few days of sunshine, terrible, awful for the planet. I think we need to be a bit boosterish about this and say that it's a really good thing that human beings can go and see stuff outside of their back garden. It's good for the soul, never mind it being good for the economy or whatever, or growth or anything else. It's something that a sophisticated, civilized, cultured society should promote. And, on the sort of emissions thing, I mean, it's estimated that a third runway would be about 4.4 million tonnes, and the global total is, 37 billion or something like that. So, the sort of it's a drop in the ocean argument, it isn't necessarily going to win it, but this really is a drop in the ocean. We're not talking about...
It's not a drop in the UK ocean, though, is it?
We're not suddenly talking about absolute disaster. Emissions. And I think the benefits massively outweigh any of the arguments for costs.
OK, Mark?
Look, two things. Aviation generally, I'm going to agree with Ella. There was a very clear lesson for us all during the pandemic when we told people they couldn't fly. It was terrible. And for a country like Britain, where you've got millions of British people who've got family, friends, business contacts around the world, telling them they couldn't fly was a terrible thing to do, and telling human beings that they should have less contact with human beings around the world, terrible. So my lesson from that is we should enable people to fly, but we should do it in a way that's good for the planet. And the way you do that is you do what human beings have done through the generations, is we use technology. And the brilliant thing that I learned when I was doing my job as Transport Secretary is we've got fantastic people in the aviation sector. Every new generation of aeroplanes is quieter, uses less fuel, more efficient, which is great for the planet. And with things like sustainable aviation fuel, the developments of electric planes for the short-haul ones, and the great work that's going on with our global leaders in aviation for hydrogen planes for the mid-range flights, we are global leaders on this stuff, and we should continue investing in it. Government's done as well. We could lead on this stuff so that people can fly and do it in a way that's good for the planet. Both of those things are possible, and Britain is one of the best countries in the world to do it.
Paul, we had someone from the New Economics Foundation on earlier, sort of left-leaning think tank, and one of his main arguments was that essentially we should be discouraging people from flying because they spend their money outside Britain. I mean, that slightly plays into Ella's argument. This is a very sort of, it's okay for middle-class people to do it, but we don't want the working classes to fly too much in case they spend their money in places that we don't like.
And I don't think, I think Steve, the questioner, says, is Labour betraying the planet? I think we've got to be very clear with people. I'm a Labour person. I don't agree with that NEF, New Economics Foundation argument. And I'd go further. I'd say, I come back to it. We're on our monitors here. We're watching Trump sign some legislation that's going to open up Guantanamo. Okay, the thing about Trump is we can't. It's a sad thing to say, because I'm a big supporter of the Anglo-American relationship. We can't be certain that America's going to be our ally in the long term. We can't be certain that American democracy is going to come in and save us from whatever it is that's facing us in the world. Likewise, Europe, though I love Europe and I want us to face Europe and collaborate with Europe, we can't be certain that that's not going to fall apart either. And we're in a situation where, as I say at the beginning, every decision I now think the government should take should start with, we live in a dangerous world where we can't be sure about stuff. Now, one thing we can be sure about is if you expand Heathrow, you make a long-term contribution to growth. And so what I'd say to Steve, I campaign in the general election. I tend to do this. Campaign in places where I think we're probably going to lose, and so work out why. I go on the doorstep, and I was in Bristol Central where we lost to the Greens, and the Greens fought a very strong campaign and won. And I remember a guy coming out of his house. It was probably, I put it between £1 and £2 million house, and he said, "I can never vote for you guys, Labour, because you're in favour of growth." Well, to me, that's an argument we have to defeat in this country, because I live in a decent house, and I've benefited not just from growth, but from the fact that my dad and granddad dug the coal that put the carbon in the atmosphere. And I'm not going to stand there and say to the people at 5 o'clock waiting for those little yellow label goods at the end of the Tesco aisle, the knocked down cheese, the knocked down bread, oh, you can't have any more growth. And I'm not going to say it to China or India either. We've got to have sustainable growth. And I think we stand in a very good position. We're a country, we're the Saudi Arabia of wind power. If we only had a steel industry and an industrial strategy that allowed our workers to make these wind turbines and not somebody else's workers, everything would be good about the deployment of renewables. So we've got to, I think Reeves is right, we've got to build a good industrial base that can respond to the opportunities of renewable energy, but that's not there. And she's found herself with all these pieces, to be honest, shattered fragments of an economy that she needs to kind of meld together, and it's proving more difficult than I think they thought.
It's a funny old world, isn't it, where 10 years ago you and I would appear on panels like this and we would disagree, sometimes slightly violently with each other. And yet now we find ourselves in agreement on a huge amount of things. I don't know what's happened. I don't know whether it's happened to me or to you.
It might be me, but let me just address the serious point there. I think 10 years ago, when the cost of money was 1%, it's now close to 5%. So the interest rate the government pays on its borrowing is 5 times. So if a cost of a pint of lager went from £6 to 30 quid, wouldn't that change people's attitudes to everything? What's changed our attitudes, I think, is that the world situation is dangerous. And we both understand it, coming from a conservative and a socialist background, that we are in this little island and defending something very dear to us, democracy.
Look, can I just bring some
I've got to go
disagreement in this little cosy interaction?
Quite briefly, because I've got to go to the news.
I'm just not convinced that the person waiting for the knockoff sandwiches in Tesco with the yellow stickers is going to be heartened by Paul. The only 2 things you've mentioned is electric vehicles, which at best are annoying to people at the moment. They're not popular, and wind farms, which in a country where the wind doesn't always blow. I mean, this isn't the groundbreaking, growth-inspiring stuff that we need. That it needs. It's just
right.
It still sounds.
Let's leave that hanging there, because we do need to get the news headlines on LBC. It's 8:34. Daryl Jackson has the headlines.
The Chancellor has told LBC the answer to new infrastructure projects can't always be no after backing a third runway at Heathrow Airport. Rachel Reeves says her optimism for Britain burns brighter than ever. Donald Trump says he will send migrants to Guantanamo Bay. The US president confirmed he's directing the opening of a detention centre to hold up to 30,000 people who are living illegally in the US. 137 Lloyds, Halifax and Bank of Scotland branches are closing across the UK between May this year and March next year. Lloyds banking groups blaming the move on customers shifting away from in-person services. LBC weather, cloud and rain gradually clearing in the south tonight. Isolated showers expected in Northern Ireland and northern Scotland. Elsewhere, dry and clear and a low of -2.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:37 on LBC. Mark Harper, Sarah Olney, Paul Mason and Ella Whelan with us answering your questions. Now, an anonymous texter asks, is there anything that the Liberal Democrats actually do support building? They're against onshore and offshore wind, are they? They're against nuclear power, yes. Against solar farms, are they? Against train lines, electricity pylons and new roads. What do the Liberal Democrats support building, Sarah Olney?
OK, I'm ready. Well, we're not against building onshore, offshore wind. And in fact, Ed Davey, when he was the Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change, actually created the sort of the financial structure that has enabled so much wind power in the UK today. But in addition to that, we were always big supporters of HS2. We would have liked to have seen that continue.
No, you were not.
We were always supporters of HS2. We're supporters of Northern Powerhouse rail electrification, EV infrastructure. We have ambitious house building programmes, and we're putting those into place in the places where we run the councils, in places like Kingston upon Thames, for example. We're currently doing a big redevelopment of socially rented homes. It's something that's a really big project that the council there are doing. So there's lots and lots of things. But, it's very much about sustainable development. It's about renewable energy, and it's about new ways of travelling around, because we cannot continue to rely on fossil fuels.
Much as I'd love to have all the rest of the panel's views on Liberal Democrat infrastructure, let's move on to a text question from David in Ipswich. With President Trump sending illegal immigrants to Guantanamo Bay, should we here be considering something similar to the old Rwanda scheme to stop the boats? Now, to recap, Donald Trump has just announced, literally in the last few minutes, that he's going to sign an executive order which will see a detention facility set up at Guantanamo Bay for 30,000 illegal migrants to be housed while they're waiting to be deported. Ella.
Well, I mean, in the abstract, any government having the ability to detain and deport is necessary, and obviously there was big support for that abstract idea, not necessarily the Rwanda scheme, because the Rwanda scheme was tokenistic, I think cruel and probably morally dubious, but also unworkable. As we said, Mark shaking his head, I'm going to ignore it. It was unworkable. But in the abstract, it's something that people think a functioning immigration system should be able to deploy. Obviously, the problem with Trump and Guantanamo Bay is that we know that the treatment of people in Guantanamo Bay is abhorrent and inhuman. I mean, I feel always a tick that I have to remind people that Trump is not, he gets portrayed as this unholy monster who is particularly and uniquely evil to immigrants or terror suspects or whatever. And, 2012, Obama personally signed the National Defense Authorization Act, which basically was an act saying that they could detain people without trial indefinitely for however long they wanted to. Again, infamously, Obama was, had the highest level of deportations, brought in fingerprint screening for local police officers, turning them into immigration officers. So there's been. Trump is not unique in his approach. He might be bombastic and brash in his rhetoric around this, but America has had a very big problem with how it deals with immigration for quite some time. This isn't necessarily the aberration I think lots of people think it is.
Paul? I think, first thing to say is I've been in a migrant detention centre in America. It was a jail in Phoenix, Arizona.
What had you done?
Well, no, I had joined Newsnight as a correspondent, and so they let me in.
And they sent you there?
The American jail system is very open to the media, unlike we can't even interview prisoners in this country, I think rightly, but the American jail system is like a shop window for here's what happens to you if you break the law. Now, none of these people had broken any other law other than the fact that they'd come illegally into America.
Which is a law that they've broken.
Yes, but in the sense that they weren't also criminals. But it was a jail, and everyone was forced to live in a tent, wear pink underwear, and all the food was out past its sell-by date, and it was very draconian. very draconian indeed. And it was, I don't know what the centigrade equivalent is, it was 114 Fahrenheit in the desert. The point is, that was under Bush. And I think probably 5, 6, 7 million people have come to the United States since then, illegally. And so the point I'm making is they already have a very draconian regime, and it doesn't stop illegal migration. What's the illegal migration that's happening in America, unlike ours, I would argue, is largely economically driven. You get in your van, you cross the border, you go and work in the San Bernardino Valley in California. That's been denuded of workers, by the way, since Trump came in, since these raids started. So it's for America. The two are unlike, but the questioner asked, should we do something like this? My argument would be, it doesn't stop the migration, no matter how draconian you make it.
Okay, Mark?
Well, I think the principle of having a deterrent is very sensible. I mean, the Rwanda scheme that we had was not intended to send huge numbers of people. What it was supposed to do was send a very clear message to people that if you come to the country illegally, you're not going to stay. And then you hope that then drives down the numbers of people coming. That was the plan. Never got a chance to use it, obviously, because of the election. Labour then scrapped it, but didn't put in place any other form of deterrent. All they said they're going to do is speed up decision-making, which is actually going to allow more people to stay, and it'll incentivise more people to cross the channel, which I think is a terrible thing to do. And Paul, they are largely economic migrants because all of those people crossing the channel are all coming from a safe country where they could claim asylum, and they choose to come to Britain. So they're not fleeing persecution at all because they're in France, right? And they've come through a whole bunch of other European countries. So that's not a very sensible argument. But we've got to have a system where you benefit people that do the right thing. So people who come here legally as migrants and get really annoyed by people that break the rules, and people who come here illegally they are criminals. They have broken the criminal law because coming to Britain when you don't have the right to be here is against the law.
How many of them have
Overstaying a
been
visa
charged with
is
that
against the law.
How many of them were charged with that offence under your government?
We don't do that and prosecute them because because what we don't want to do is keep them in prison for longer. What we want to do is deport them back to the country that they came from, particularly criminals. One of the things I did when I was Immigration Minister, we passed legislation to toughen up the law so that if you were a criminal sent to prison for more than 4 years, the default was that you were deported. And I think that's right. People want to be generous to people that come here legally, who are going to contribute to the country, pay more tax than they consume, and make us all richer. They don't want people coming here who aren't going to do that and are going to come here and break the rules, and particularly people who come here and commit other serious crimes.
Sarah?
I think Mark's kind of got this the wrong way around, really. I mean, the problem we've had over the last few years is we've got this massive backlog of people who've come here and claimed asylum, but it has taken years in some cases. Some of them have been in my constituency and they've come to me as their MP, and I've been astonished to find that people have been here for 2-3 years waiting for a decision, and you go to the Home Office and, you know, it's still, they can't guarantee to get back to you in 6 months. And these people have been stuck in hotels and, you know, at enormous cost to the taxpayer. So I think that's been a huge problem, and we've really got to deal with that backlog. We've got to get through that, you know, all of those people who've made those applications, because actually you can't say people are here illegally until you have established what their status is, because for some people those will be valid asylum applications. They will have the right to stay. And the quicker we can get their immigration status, you know, sorted out, then the earlier, the sooner they can come and start working and start contributing to the economy and to their local communities. And that's better for everybody. So I think the absolutely most important thing is to get the backlog down, but also to make sure that we are dealing much more efficiently with some of the applications. And just to pick up on what Paul was saying there, they can't apply until they're here. So that's why they're coming. So if we had better options for people, if they think they've got a claim to apply from other countries, then they wouldn't be coming across on boats in quite such large numbers.
The numbers will be absolutely enormous, even bigger than they are now. And I don't think Britain cannot be the place where millions and millions of people around the world choose to come. We are one of the best countries in the world.
Are millions coming now? Is that?
No, but if you said anybody in the world could make an asylum claim,
no one's saying that.
At a British embassy abroad, which is what you just said.
No, I didn't. I didn't.
You said people should be able to make claims from outside the United Kingdom.
What I'm saying is, for
which
people
means
who
you would
think they've got a claim,
increase the
people
number.
who think they've got a claim could make it from overseas and then they're not coming here then to make the claim and stuck in a hotel for 3 years and then being told they have to go back. That would be a much more pragmatic way to do it. Of course, I'm not saying that millions of people should apply, but even if they did, the point is they could have their application decided before they came here. And then it would be like, no, you're not welcome, you can't come.
Tony says, Tesco aren't good at reducing stuff. Waitrose and Morrison's are much better, just so everybody knows, according to Tony, that is. Right, we're looking forward to our fun question at the end of the programme, as I'm sure all the panel are. It's 8:47.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
10:09. Mark Harper, Sarah Olney, Paul Mason and Ella Whelan here taking your questions. Victoria says, hi Iain, I must say your guest Ella Whelan speaks so much sense and comes across as fair. Great guest. She should definitely be a regular. Well, Victoria, if you were a regular listener, you would know that Ella Whelan, by appearing tonight on the show, has tied, wait for this, with Barry Gardner and Yasmin Alabai-Brown as our most often invited guests.
Please never put all of us on a panel together. I don't think we'd get on.
Would that be the panel of death?
I'm not sure they'd like to be on it with me.
Well, there's a thought. Right, a text question here from Adrian on the Isle of Man. Is it time that teenagers begin to truly think about the reason they want to go to university and consider if it is worth the lifetime of debt they will find themselves in? Now, Durham University announced today that it plans to cut hundreds of jobs in order to reduce staff costs by 20 million, while Cardiff University has announced it will cut 400 jobs and some degree programmes. Sarah?
Well, this is obviously, you know, the news that universities are planning to cut jobs and courses is really terrible. I mean, it's, you know, we were talking at the beginning of the programme about growth, and obviously our university sector is a really, really important part of that. It's such a obviously training the next generation of workers, but also they're such laboratories for innovation. So this is really, really bad news, I think. But we've known for a long time that there's a funding crisis. The Conservatives, the last Conservative government, they badly broke the funding system. But we need a full review of higher education finance.
Wasn't this created by Vince Cable, Liberal Democrat cabinet minister?
Well, but the point is there's not been enough money going into higher education over the last few years, and the universities have been calling out for more money for quite some time now, and it's really, really important, as I say, that if growth is the priority, that we make sure that there is proper funding on the table for our universities.
So you say you want tuition fees to go up?
No, I don't want tuition fees to go up. I think there are other options.
Who's putting the money in then?
Well, but the
taxpayers.
Point. But if Rachel Reeves has just done her massive speech today about growth, and what I'm saying is that universities are absolutely fundamental to that. We've got to make the money available to higher education in order to make sure that we've got a sustainable economy in the future. And if we want growth, it's got to come from innovation, it's got to come from productivity gains, and that comes from research and development.
But surely it's up to universities to get their finances in order. I can remember 22 years ago, the language department that I got my degree in at the University of East Anglia, so this is 2004, that closed down. And I remember going to speak to a student union protest about it. And I was absolutely incensed by this. But to pretend that these sort of cuts are just sort of happening now, it's always been the case. Some universities manage their finances better than others.
Well, and that's obviously a case for the individual universities. If the government thinks that there are universities who are, not planning their budgets appropriately, or not offering what students need, or not, delivering, or as you say, managing their money properly, then maybe there's a case there for them to step in and intervene.
So coming back to the specific question, which was about students thinking carefully about what they want to do, yes, they absolutely should. They should only go to university if they think it's going to make sense. One of the things I'm proudest of that we did, I think, in government was widening the range of options for young people. I think apprenticeships are fantastic. I met lots of young people in my former constituency who'd done degree apprenticeships, where the employer paid for it, made sure they had a job, they learnt relevant skills, and they didn't then have the debt as well. So I think you need to present young people with a range of options, apprenticeships at all levels, degree apprenticeships, and then for some universities that they pay for the tuition fees, and they need to think carefully about what makes sense for them. And some will just want to go into work where they're going to get trained properly. But thinking about what you want to do and why you want to do it is the right thing to do, and that's a great question.
Brief answers, if I may, because I've got a corker of a question which I want to fit in. Paul?
I just think, while we're discussing this problem, China, China has 7 top-secret military universities which are churning out the people who are making this century's high-tech. I want us to be able to mirror that. I want us to be able to match that level of ambition. But if there's some universities' business models are failing, and if there are some people doing degrees that aren't getting them anywhere, I'm quite happy to see that economic activity move somewhere else.
We've got some of the best universities in the world.
That's higher value, that's higher growth, actually. You can earn 50, 60, 70k as a nuclear qualified welder. When I tell people this, their jaws drop. And of course, you have to train and you have to be qualified and meet certain security requirements. But there are great careers in industry that don't need degrees. So think carefully about what you're doing. Meanwhile, of course, the cause of all this, this particular round of cuts, is that the numbers of overseas students arriving are falling because they have better options elsewhere in the world. We've decided their families can't come. That's a decision, and we have to live with the consequences.
Ella?
I'm genuinely torn on it because, on the one hand, the vast majority of the degrees that young people get today aren't worth the paper they're written on. The quality of education at university is poorer by the year. The sort of courses that are on offer here, even in relation to your standard, English literature or history, whatever, are pretty dreadful. And so it's pointless for a lot of kids. And the discussion about universities often incredibly instrumental is all career-based. And so for that reason, I tell lots of teenagers, do not bother. Get a job and meet people outside and go out, and don't bother going to university. On the other hand, the reason I'm torn is that I think that having an institution where young people can go to spend 3 years doing something that they love, like I did, read books for 3 years, met my husband there. You know, it was a life-changing experience for me. My parents were the first in their family to go to university. All of that. I want that for my kids. I think people should be able to have that. But the problem at the moment is the universities are not what they should be. They are not places of investigation and learning and the pursuit of knowledge. A lot of the time they're sort of cesspits of the worst kind of politically correct nonsense and at best a sort of waste of time.
Well, we're going to continue this discussion after 9 o'clock in our 9 o'clock phone-in. Now, text question from Julia in Reading, which I'm going to have to ask you all to be relatively brief answering. If these outdated men-only members clubs won't agree to get with the times, should they just be banned altogether? Now, Central London's 150-year-old Savile Club has voted against allowing women to join. The club rejected a motion calling for the word male to be replaced with persons in its founding rules. Last May, the almost 200-year-old Garrick Club did agree to admit female members and has since begun doing so, starting with the two acting dames, Judi Dench and Sian Phillips. Mark?
I don't think we should ban them, but I think customers should vote with their feet. So I wouldn't join a male-only club. The one I belong to has had both sexes for a very long period of time. I think people should, choose and go where they want. But I wouldn't ban them. I don't think they're doing any harm. But I think people should vote with their feet. I can't imagine why somebody would want to join one now. They're not really in the modern world.
Sarah?
It's up to the individual club, I think, if they prefer to be all male. I genuinely...
There is an all-female club, isn't there? Can't remember what it's called, but somewhere in Mayfair.
I don't know. They haven't invited me to be a member, so obviously I wouldn't join if they did. But I mean, if men want to get together and just have an all-male thing, genuinely doesn't bother me all that much, as long as it's not then the case that women are then being shut out of other opportunities or they're being disregarded in other ways. But, for men to get together socially, it's not really a huge problem for me personally.
Ella?
No, they shouldn't be banned, and who cares? But isn't it interesting that there's this discussion about men's clubs, and women are currently being banned from having their own women-only clubs, where only women are allowed, and crucially not other individuals, trans women being it, whether that's, not clubs, but serious spaces like rape crisis centres or, I don't know, swimming pools. The swimming pond in Hampstead comes to mind. Women-only clubs are not allowed. So let's talk about that rather than the bloody Garrick Club.
Paul, are we going to see working persons clubs spring up all over the place, do you think?
Well, Luke, come back to the point. In my job, to do my job, I occasionally go to these clubs. I've never been to one of the male-only ones, but I've been to the ones that are basically reenactment societies for the 19th century. And I just find them terribly sad, because the worst thing is, as well, lots of foreign diplomats come to them, and they think that's what England is, Britain is like. And I would just say to them, to all of these clubs, what you're doing is you're creating a kind of fantasy world of how you think Britain used to be. And the problem is, again, while you're doing that, China's inventing a supersonic aircraft, and I would rather be in the modern world.
And I bet you're the same as me. Whenever you go to these clubs for lunch or something, you're always afraid that you're going to do something that your mother would be ashamed of you for.
You already know.
That's how I feel. That is absolutely how I feel.
When the guy at the door looks at your shoes,
yeah,
you think, these shoes cost me a lot of money. Then, oh no, that's not the right shoe.
Anyway, let's move on to our final fun question. It comes from Celia in Taunton. The Royal Shakespeare Company has announced that it will be adapting Roald Dahl's children's novel, The BFG, The Big Friendly Giant, to take to the stage at the end of this year. Which book would you like to see turned into a theatre show? Mark?
Well, you mentioned in your introduction that I was a government chief whip in the past, so I think I'm going to have to choose Michael Dobbs's House of Cards, turned into two very successful television adaptations, one in the UK and one in the United States, but I think putting it on the stage so everybody could learn about how chief whips...
And you could be the consultant advisor.
Do their business. And there's a role, perhaps, yes, if anyone's thinking of doing it, very welcome to help
Sarah.
them.
Oh, well, I was cringing a little bit when people were talking about useless degrees because I have an English literature degree, but
So do I, not useless. Not useless at all.
No, because actually I've read, a vast number of books. My favourite is always going to be Middlemarch, and I don't know why it hasn't been adapted more often. I'd love to see that on stage.
Ella.
I never finished Middlemarch. That's one of the books that I can get on with. We can write about that later.
You absolutely should.
Listen, I'm looking forward to the articles I can write for the Telegraph about this adaptation of the BFG, because Roald Dahl has been mauled by any reprint, and I suspect they're not going to keep in all his colourful language in this stage adaptation. So I'd, say there are lots of children's books out there. David McKee comes to mind, and obviously all I'm reading at the moment is children's books. Ian,
yes.
my 2-year-old.
Yes, because over the last few years you've been permanently pregnant on this.
Yeah, exactly. Never again. And there's lots of really, let's say, colourful language out there in children's book of a fun kind, calling, characters that are fat and ugly and boss-eyed and all the rest of it. Kids love that kind of thing. So put that in the stage adaptation.
Enid Blyton. Paul.
10 Years to Save the West by Liz Truss. I love comedy.
I'm going to nominate Watership Down because I'd just like to see rabbits on stage. Thank you all very much indeed for coming on the show this evening. Now, on Monday, the panel includes the anti-racism activist Imam Aitan, Labour MP Dan Tomlinson and the Conservative Policy Advisor Christopher Howarth. Coming up in the next hour, we are going to talk about universities. We just have been, haven't we? We're going to ask, is there any sensible solution to the university's funding crisis beyond significantly increasing tuition fees? Is it time to rethink how many young people are going to university and getting themselves into tens of thousands pounds worth of debt by doing so? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. We should learn in the next hour if the For the Many podcast has won the Comedy Moment of the Year at the Political Podcast Awards. Corey, my producer, is there, along with Jackie Smith. I will bring you the latest news over the next 60 minutes.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, the Chancellor says backing a third runway